All right, so good afternoon, everyone. This is the Wednesday, March 8th meeting of the Policy Committee. The agenda is here shared with you. And we're going to begin with 800 level policies. We had 4 800 level policies that we had held over for solicitor review at the guidance of PSBA. Ms. Green, I think we'll have you start with records management.
Sure. So this is a policy that is establishing a records management plan. It goes into detail what would be included in that. And it also establishes a record management coordinator, which is the superintendent or myself. So I'm leaning towards that it's going to be me as far as the record management coordinator. We will also have in the original policy that was presented by PSBA, there was a lot of procedural information that we are going to put into administrative regs and procedures in order to outline exact record retention requirements and what staff will be responsible with that. So that's the records management policy.
Are there any questions? Okay, so we're going to go to 810.1.
Okay, I'll continue on with this.
Yep.
This
Mary Jo, don't forget to go into draft policies.
I thought I was. Sorry, I apologize. For some reason it was. Give me just a moment. There we go. I'm having trouble with my mouse. So 800 was records management. Sorry about that. And then 810.1, these other 3 are new policies. So sorry about that, Karen. Go right ahead.
No, that's okay. No, good catch, Emily. So the next one is school bus drivers and school commercial motor vehicle drivers. So this policy addresses the practice of safety measures as well as employment requirements, and really gets into controlled substance and alcohol testing. And this is specifically for school bus and commercial vehicle drivers. So this wouldn't, we'll talk about in the next policy for those people that are driving vehicles that like our maintenance vehicles. But this is specifically for school bus drivers and school commercial motor vehicle drivers. The only thing that had to be chosen in this policy, it specifically identifies that a driver that is arrested, charged, or issued for with a citation for violating federal, state law or local ordinance, that's where you see those 3 highlighted areas. We had to choose one. So this was reviewed by Mr. Bray, our Director of Transportation. I believe Emily also reviewed this policy. And we chose the middle one, which is within 72 hours before the driver's next assigned shift. So if any violation or citation or arrest were to happen, it is the driver's responsibility to notify the district within 72 hours of their next shift. So that was the big selection in this one outside of the draft of the policy written by PSBA.
So again, this is a new policy, and then we had to make that one choice. Any questions or concerns about this policy? Okay, so we'll go to 810.3.
Okay, and this one is similar to the 810.1, except it is specific to school vehicle drivers. So those are drivers that are transporting students, less than 10 students, like, so it would be a district van, similar to a small special needs ride, that it's not a specific school bus driver. And we added, and this was with Emily and Mr. Bray, we added equipment operators. That includes our maintenance staff. So like there was nothing in here that addressed like driving the bucket truck or the plumber truck. So we defined the equipment operators, and we added throughout the policy where it says school vehicle drivers, we added the phrase and or equipment operators. So it does the same thing as the 810.1 policy. It does it for a different classification of drivers and employees.
Kara,
And
I just want
then-
to I just
Oh.
want to clarify for the group.
Yep.
This is not changing our policy or procedures. We were previously I know it's showing as a new policy. We do currently have a drug testing policy in place that is drug testing all of these people by law. So I just want to make sure that everyone knows that we're not just newly implementing drug testing.
The other thing under this policy is that there was a policy previously and it basically identified the procedure for staff use of district vehicles for school business. So we're going to fold that language in an administrative reg to identify the procedures for staff use of district vehicles for school business. So that will be attached to this policy as well.
So you may recall that last year, as we were approving the lower numbered policies, the 1s, 2s, 3s, and 6s, we talked about the fact that last summer, following the approval of all the policies, we'd be writing administrative regulations or revising administrative regulations to come into line with the newly approved policies. It's our intention to do the same this summer for the 7s, 8s, and 9s. So any questions on 810.3? Okay, so we'll go with 827, conflict of interest. Carrie, you can continue.
I did not work on this policy. I don't want to kick it to anybody that looked at this. I know it addresses the statement of financial interest, but as far as the procedure for investigation, I don't know if anybody else had input.
I didn't have any further input from the solicitor.
Yeah.
But it was fine as is.
Yes.
So there was nothing else that you were looking for. I do see the one language change under disciplinary actions.
Yes. So this was minimal changes and as written.
Okay. Any questions on conflict of interest? This is also a new policy. So this will conclude the 800 level policies. And we'll come back to a few tweaks when we get into updates in the board in the agenda for today's meeting. But I'll shift to the 900s now. So one of the nice things about this is the last time that the school district reviewed policy, we didn't get to some of these upper level policies. We ran out of time. And so it's nice because a lot of these had not been renewed in some time. But we're going to start with the new policies. So I'm going to start with 910, community engagement. And Dr. Johnston, I know that you reviewed this policy and your office reviewed it. Is there anything you want to share with the board about this policy?
I think what's most interesting about this is, given that PSBA issued this as a new policy, that the recommendation is that we formalize and clarify the community broadly, not just the members of the school community, but the community in general as a stakeholder in the school district decision making. It actually empowers the board to hear from the community on particular issues and gives them standing to raise concerns through the process. Ultimately saying the board still has the final point of decision, but that there are benefits and opportunities that are provided within a community that the school district needs to consider seriously. Not that we didn't think of that before, but I think it really formalizes that expectation and that we hold regular updates to our community beyond those just enrolled in the schools. And so I think that it just formalizes that and then requires some components. You'll hear the dog in the background. I'm very sorry. It just formalizes some of those components as a part of our decision making.
So are there any questions on this policy? Okay, I'm going to jump to 917 then.
That's me too.
Indeed.
917 is similarly identifies and requires the school districts to have organized process and procedures in place for family and parents' involvement in school decisions, and really articulates the requirements to coordinate two-way communication with families as partners in the education of their own children. And so this just really intends to intersect nicely with our, as it turns out, intersects nicely with our equity action plan, which looks at transparency and authenticity and two-way communication that's accessible to all families.
And I really think 918 and 917, while they're two separate policies, they do go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to jump to that one, which actually, and again, Dr. Johnson, I don't know if you wanted to share information about this. I know.
Sure, Dr. Lutz worked on this one, but
Yeah.
it really just, again, formalizes the requirement under Title I, which we already do, really, for parent and family engagement and as fully participating and opportunities to volunteer and learn about their child's areas of need. And so we talked about school collaboration coming out of there, but really looking at things and ways in which we can meet the needs of the students and the families.
So you see the items that are highlighted under the district, what the district will do. And so we'll mark each of those, that we will do all of them, and then we'll eliminate other, if that sounds okay to you. So these are all things that we're currently doing, and we're happy to continue doing in trying to engage parents whose children are involved in our Title I programs. Are there
Again,
any
I think
questions?
the only other thing I was going to do is tie all those together. And I think it really makes the assumption that what we're doing as best practice right now in Springfield Township becomes the norm and isn't predicated on this particular board or this particular leadership team. It identifies all these members as viable stakeholders who need to collaborate to meet the needs of the students.
Thank you. Any questions about this policy? We do have the school to parent and family compacts on our website underneath the Office of Teaching and Learning. So, and we had worked on that several years ago. We'd worked on a revision of that. And then the other item that Dr. Lutz did mention is that she wants to include as able on the top of page 3. So we'll get there. Let's see. She wants it to be able to say, under parent responsibilities, let me go back there, not too far. Make sure I'm on the right page. So that some families may not be able to volunteer, so you know they may have other obligations. So she wanted to make sure, and then additionally, some of the suggested activities for parent-school collaboration have been removed to focus and highlight those that are sustainable, given the small population and the changing students. So we do have a fairly small population of Title I students. Any questions on this new policy? Okay. All right, so then I'm going to go forward. So the rest of the policies, we're now in the next section of the agenda, are revisions to existing policies. So essentially 902 basically says that we will keep the community informed. It's a pretty simple, straightforward policy, but that we will let them know what's going on. Again, as you've heard a couple of times, the recurring theme in the 900s is communication, transparency, accessibility to the public. And so you can see some these are mild changes, but nonetheless recommended, and we're fine with the recommended changes as is. 904 was a little bit more involved. So 904 is public attendance at school events. And they have added some fairly significant language specific to vaping and use of tobacco on school grounds during school events. And I think, you know, we can all recognize that that's the result of the increase in those usage by adults and students. And so the language in here in particular, you can see a specific section on tobacco and vaping products, including actually mentioning Juuls and other e-cigarettes, that they are not permitted on school grounds during school events. And then there's also an attachment, and the attachment, which we also put into the agenda, we've had reviewed by our athletic department at both the middle and the high school, because many of these events are athletic events. They're not exclusive, because certainly we have concerts and musicals and plays and such, but 904 really concentrated on the public attendance. Any questions on this particular policy? It also loops in the service animals, which we had talked about in a previous policy, so that you can bring service animals to public events. Excuse me, I'm a little stuffy. All right, so I'm going to go to 905. 905 is, in my view, sort of an outgrowth of the earlier policy that Damien mentioned about community engagement. So this empowers the board to create and then work through an advisory committee. So if there were a topic of interest to the community and to the board, and you wanted to engage the broader community, this allows you to create an advisory committee. So not a new policy, but just some revisions to allow for process. It also still maintains the board's ability to hear feedback, but not necessarily to follow it. So ultimately, the board still retains its ability to just make decisions for the district. Are there any questions about this policy? Okay. All right, 906 is public complaint procedures. So you can see there's a lot of language change to this. And the goal here, this is the steps families and community members can take to report and resolve a complaint with the district. So it originates with the person with whom they have a concern and then escalates only if those parties are unable to resolve the matter. So it provides for chain of command. Currently, complaint procedures are highlighted in each building's student and family handbook, including the appropriate chain of command. Once the policy is approved, then we would create the AR. This is one of the policies that would have a fairly detailed AR to go along with it, that again, we would revise this summer. Any questions on 906?
Dr. Yannicone,
Yes.
905 on the agenda is not listed. I don't know whether I'm looking at the wrong thing, but it goes 902, 904, 906.
Thank you. I will make sure 905 is added.
Okay, sorry.
Okay. No, I appreciate the note. Probably we missed it because their changes are so minor. Nonetheless, I want to make sure it's added. All right. Any questions on public complaint? Okay, so I'll go to school visitors. So this encourages and provides information for parents who want to visit school buildings, including communication from parents around the purpose of the visit. So there's security elements to this that help to make sure that we're maintaining our security procedures, that we still have to have people provide identification, go through the Raptor system. We do need AR revisions to this policy, and we will provide those to make sure that we're up to date on current practices. And then it also has some clarification of criminal offenses and Megan's Law violators, like, you know, how exactly we are supposed to respond to that if a parent is asking to visit. Are there any questions about this policy? Okay. So 908, similarly, relations with parents and guardians. This highlights the role that parents and guardians play in supporting their school-age child, including active participation in conferences, open houses, and school events. The ARs developed after board approval will highlight how this policy interacts with other crucial documents in the district, including our MOU with the Springfield Township Police Department and various attendance and crisis management procedures designed to support students and their families. So Dr. Lutz reviewed this policy with our clinical team, and again, we'll be taking the lead in the AR that will follow. Are there any questions on this policy? Okay, 909, municipal government relations. So this policy added a little bit of language to allow for engagement with the local municipality. Essentially, some of the things we've been talking about related to township and school district relationships is articulated in this policy. And it also allows us to highlight the responsibilities between the local police department and the school district. And as you know, we have an MOU that's actually up for renewal this year, every 2 years. And so we'll be moving into conversations with the local police department in April, as soon as we come back from spring break. All right, any questions on 910? So 911 basically just has what my role is as superintendent in keeping the media informed in relevant matters. And essentially my responsibility to be the voice of the district in those matters. And then it also allows for guidelines for photographs, like how and when we use photographs in any public relations. Any questions on this policy? Okay. 9-12, I believe, Dr. Johnston, was yours.
It is mine. This one is establishing relationships with educational institutions. Ultimately, this policy just suggests that we play nicely in the sandbox with other educational institutions and collaborate in order to meet the needs of the students that we serve. Seems like a good idea, and now it's a policy. Any
questions? These aren't flashy, these 900s. It's probably why I didn't get to them too much previously. There's not a whole lot of flash here. 913.
913 is also mine. This one feels a little more complex in that it identifies our responsibility and reorganizes previously 913 and 913.1 in a comprehensive policy. And this one identifies the time, place, and manner of material distribution for non-school organizations. So that includes all the flyers that come home all the time, right around the upcoming Springfield Township camps programs, or the I-9 soccer games, or like all those things that come home. It really talks about where and when these things can be distributed. This one also is the policy that identifies fundraising, international travel, and scholarships, and the ways in which scholarships can be made available to students. There is a lot of proposed language changes you can see in this policy, a lot. But I think ultimately it provides a lot more clarity and support for the district in the decisions that we make, and covers us more readily in making decisions on yeses or nos on what we are or are not distributing, and provides a process to do that, which we'll have to build out in the AR this summer.
One of the recent comments, I think, Carla, that you provided was around international trips and the way in which they're handled. I think at a recent board meeting, you raised that question. So our administrative regulations review this summer is absolutely going to need to address that, so we can clarify procedures moving forward. We have procedures in place, but we want to make sure that we're following best practice and that we're following this revised policy once it's approved. Are there any questions on 913? I agree with Damien. This is a more substantive policy in this area. All right. So I'll go to 914, relations with the intermediate unit.
Me too.
Yes.
This policy directs the school district to consider and coordinate opportunities with the IU, in this case, Montgomery County IU, in purchasing and the use of services. It also sort of indicates that when we are reviewing the IU's budgets, if we're choosing to shift any of our priorities away from using the IU for a service, it would be articulated to them during their budget planning process. I think that's to protect the IU, and that our school district of Springfield Township board member who serves on the IU board is the primary liaison between our district and the Montgomery County IU.
Any questions on this policy? Okay. All right, 915 is back to Carrie, yes?
That is correct. I reviewed this policy with Joe Fiaro, who handles the obviously the booster clubs and parent organization when it comes to athletics. They're very minor changes and revisions. It's really just for clarity on some of the language that's in this policy. There is an administrative reg that will be reviewed this summer and updated under the guise or direction or guidance from Mr. Fiaro.
Any questions on this policy? Okay. All right, so 916, volunteers. This was a pretty thorough review. Who has something they want to say about volunteers? Emily?
Again, volunteers are under my office. So this was a big review. So this is the policy that we follow for any volunteer that comes into the district. It highlights the requirements under state law for clearance reporting or clearance submission, TB test, arrest reporting. But the major change that you'll see for all the bold in this policy is PSBA is recommending the difference that we put in the difference between a position volunteer versus a guest volunteer. Our previous policy was really strict and said that we didn't differentiate between a position volunteer or a guest volunteer. Anyone that entered the building had to have a full clearance review and TB test and go through a full clearance process. So this allows for position volunteers, as it's defined in here. So someone who's really responsible for child welfare. So they might be going on a field trip. They might be chaperoning, tutoring, their coaches. So they're more regularly assigned and responsible for a child's welfare. That's a position volunteer. They're going to go through the full clearance process. But a guest volunteer is more like someone who might be collecting tickets at a sporting event or working at a concession stand where they're not necessarily directing children. And they might be just volunteering in a classroom celebration. So this gives us a little bit more leeway to have the two different classifications in the policy, and it is allowed under law. We would still have all guest volunteers. Anybody who enters our building is still going to go through our Raptor process. So they're going to provide their ID and we're going to put it through the Raptor system. That is our standard security procedure for anyone who enters the building. So that still will happen, even if they're a position volunteer or a guest volunteer, either one.
So as Emily mentioned, this is a much more substantive policy and has gone up under a much more thorough review as a result. So obviously there would be an AR related to this. But are there any questions about this particular policy and these changes? I tried to highlight the position and guest volunteer so you can see that a little bit more readily. No questions? Okay. All righty. So those are the end of the revised policies, and that's that section of the agenda for our meeting today. So that brings us to 901. And this is a policy where we have two different perspectives. And I just want to make sure that the board feels comfortable. So this language, everything in bold, is new language that was recommended by PSBA. But after reviewing it, I was concerned about the specificity of both the guidelines and the delegation of responsibility. And so I reached out to our solicitor for a secondary review. And our solicitor recommended that we keep our existing policy language, but remove the reference to section 3603 of the school code because that has been repealed. So rather than keeping all of this new language that's been added, if I go, it'll just take me a second, I'll go into policies and active and go to 901. Oh, well, it was removed. So if I'll have to go back. Sorry about that. I wanted to show you the draft policy, the active policy. So the active policy essentially is much less comprehensive. It basically lets us know that we have the objective of communicating with the public and of providing information as needed, which from my perspective is redundant on several of the other policies, and our solicitor agrees. So, but if you want the more specific policy in the revised PSBA recommended language here, we can do that. It's just historically, we've tried to keep our policy documents less specific, more general to allow for board flexibility. But we'll go either way. It really depends on what you would prefer.
So, Dr. Yannicone, so could you go back under what's listed under guidelines and what's listed under delegation of responsibility? You're recommending that that list not be there.
Yeah, my concern is that somebody might come in and say, well, it says you're going to do all these things and you're not doing all of them. Like, for example, recognize students and their achievements. Which achievements? All, of course, we try to recognize students and their achievements, but if somebody doesn't feel that we're following policy because we missed an achievement or it just seems far too specific to me. This language seems like something you would do in an AR more so than the actual policy. Because the purpose, right, the board will provide parents and guardians and other district residents opportunities to receive information and orientation regarding the schools. And will use all appropriate means and media. No problem.
And we've done that in the other ones we just reviewed.
That's what I felt. This seems redundant, and our solicitor agrees that our current board policy, which is much more brief, is sufficient to say we're going to do this, and that it also exists in other policies. And I think that our SMORs do the same, our weekly newsletters do the same. And it's not that I disagree that we should be doing all of this. I just don't want to put the board or the administration or the district in a poor position for somebody to come back and say that we didn't meet the letter of these additional guidelines and responsibilities.
I mean, I agree with you. Like, the more specific you are, the more you have the opportunity for people to say you're not doing what you say you're going to do. So I think it's okay not to put that.
These would all be in an AR. It's just they wouldn't be within the policy.
I think it's appropriate for them to be in the AR and not in the policy. I definitely agree with Amy and also with you, Dr. Yannico.
Okay, so I'm going to leave our 901 as it is. We'll still have it approved because there'll be some minor language shifts. Like the authority statements are fine as they are. But under guidelines and delegation of responsibility, we'll follow the existing policy and move these types of items into suggestions under the AR. Okay. All right, and then we have 3 policies to be retired. We mentioned several of them. So 913.1, Dr. Johnston mentioned that that's actually been absorbed within 913. So that's the reason why that policy would be retired. 916.1 weapons. I think it's important for the board to know that we're not eliminating, we still have a weapons policy. It is comprehensively addressed in 218.1. So we want to be very careful that people don't think we're just eliminating the policy, right? And then 921 advertising. So 913 addresses language related to advertising more generally, based on relevant court decisions tied to First Amendment litigation. This policy primarily contains the procedures established by the district for commercial advertising, display and sale of materials in schools, like sponsorships. So this language would be better suited as an administrative regulation supplemental to policy 913. That's our guidance from PSBA. So we would incorporate this language into that AR for 913. Are there any questions on the retirement in 921? Okay. So the last item that I have for you, and let me go back to the meeting agenda, is additional policy updates. And I do want to show you this board policy 707's AR. This is the only administrative regulation that is currently on the website and that we believe needs to continue to be on the website. So policy 707, use of facilities, we had to incorporate new language to it to add the new middle school athletic fields because they're opening up in the next 2 weeks for middle school spring sports. And then we also wanted to clarify the non-school responsibilities. So I'll highlight a few items for you here. So when it came to limitations on the use of the facilities, we talked about which school facilities are available for use and how they have to register for that use. And then much under registration information, what has to be included. All right, and so one of the things that's in here now is a COVID-19 safety plan. That is required by the state, and so it's required for us. And then the permit priority, we made a few adjustments to better reflect how we've been determining the order in which outside groups are able to get access to the fields. I think we've discussed there are members of the community who would love 100% access to the fields whenever we're not using them, and oftentimes will apply months and even seasons in advance. So we want to try to make sure that we're being fair to all user groups, both in season and out of season. So the permit priority was reviewed by our athletic directors as well as by Mr. Thorne. And we've made some revisions there, including the permit seasons. You can see the dates that have been highlighted there, and there's slight adjustments to those dates to better reflect the usage. And then there's also a change, and let me go down here, the rates. We have some updates, and we always publish our rates for the district facilities, but we had a few adjustments that we felt we needed to make starting next year. So this won't be for the spring, but anticipating that we're going out to RFP on our security services, we anticipate an increase in those costs. And as a result, we have some increased costs in the evening for the outdoor facilities. They're slight, but they're to help us with the anticipated increased costs in the security fees. And you see that here, district security required. And other than that, the document is essentially the same. But I do think it's important. Technically, the board does not need to approve ARs, but I do want to make you aware of it. Are there any questions? Okay, excuse me for my sniffling. All right, let me go back to the agenda. 805, emergency preparedness and response, and 808 for food services. Just wanted to let you know that we were completing some updated attachments, and that's at the recommendation of a recent PNN update. So 805, safe to say procedures. We've been provided guidance on creating an AR for safe to say procedures. We have procedures in place, but we are in the process of completing an updated attachment. Again, not something the board needs to approve, but it is something that I wanted to make you aware of. And then 808, we do have a student support request form that allows us to provide families the opportunity to ask for additional support within food services. So if a family is struggling to pay or to repay funds that they owe, we want to make sure that they're able to submit a request for that. And so both Sam Jenko, our ABA who manages food services, and Michelle Lutz as our Director of Support Services reviewed the expected support request form, and we have that available now on the website. And then the last one is Policy 903. I just wanted you to know that Policy 903 we approved last spring because there was a lot of discussion around public participation in board meetings during the pandemic. You may recall there had been a legal case out of Pennsbury School District around the requirement of 3 minutes and the requirement that you are a resident of the district. And as a result of that lawsuit coming to fruition, this policy is actually on hold at PSBA. And so there's no changes currently to the policy. There may be coming forward once PSBA has had a chance to fully digest the recommendations of that suit. And so currently our policy is in place. It's been board approved. It was board approved in the spring of 2022, but I do want you to know that there may be changes coming. Okay. And so that's all of our policy updates, and this will conclude the official PSBA review of our full set of policies. And then upcoming meetings would be, I'm thinking 3 times a year, fall, winter, and spring, starting with late this spring. And they would be focused on any updates from PSBA that require us to provide changes to board policy. So as an example, we currently have a PNN on home education, starting with the fall, and Dr. Johnson and her team are reviewing that update, and they'll be bringing recommendations at an upcoming policy committee meeting. Do you have any questions about any of this policy, Ms. Green? Okay.
That was an accident, sorry.
No worries. So the next thing we would do is then go to public comment. I don't think, Mr. Wexler, you can confirm for me, I don't think we have anybody here from the public.
There are no public attendees at this time.
Okay, so the future meeting dates are to be determined. We're thinking sometime in May. We want to go close to the end of the school year so that we get as many of the updates that might come in March, April, and May. So probably be late May, maybe even early June would be our next policy meeting and the last of this school year. So if there are no other questions, I would just entertain a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn?
Thank you, Ms. Green.
Mhm.
Ms. Hubley, you're okay with that?
Yeah.
Terrific. Well, I really appreciate it, and I will get the minutes to you both. And I believe, Ms. Green, you said that you're willing to do the summary on March 21st. That's great. All right. Thanks, everybody. We really appreciate your time.
Great. Thank you. Have a great.
All right. Meeting adjourned, Mr. Wexler.
Have a great night.